The village of Ankara lay on the edge of a great savanna where the sun kissed the earth every morning with golden heat and left each evening with a crimson bow. The people of Ankara revered the sun like a living god and feared its temporary absence more than drought, more than war. Eclipses were not merely celestial events. They were spiritual warnings, times when light and shadow fought for dominion. And so, for generations, the people believed they had to offer a life to ensure that light would always win. The chosen sacrifice was always a girl, young, untouched, quiet. No one questioned the tradition. It had been passed down like a prayer, inscribed in chants, woven into cloth, painted in ochre on the walls of the temple. Before every eclipse, the village's spiritual leader would consult the flames, read the smoke, and declare who must be given. And always the village obeyed. On the outermost edge of Ankara, near the whispering palms and the gnarled fig trees, there lived a girl named Naoka. She was not like the others. Her hair curled wild and high, her eyes too deep and too knowing. People said she asked questions that made even the wise uncomfortable. But what marked her most in their eyes wasn't her curiosity or her quiet defiance. It was the day she was born. Naoka had come into the world during the last great eclipse. The sun had disappeared for longer than anyone remembered. Some claimed it was because of her birth, that her first cry frightened the light itself. When the sun returned, weaker than before, the elder matriarch whispered that the child was cursed. No one would play with her. Few dared speak to her. But her mother, Abani, held her close. Abani was once a healer, trained in the secret arts of wind calming, song binding, and sky reading. Though pushed to the fringes of village life after Naoka's birth, she remained strong and kind, pouring her wisdom into her daughter like water into a dry gourd. She taught Naoka the songs not found in scrolls, the ones passed only from lips and heart. The girl learned how to sing storms into stillness, how to hum to the soil so it softened for planting, how to whistle to the wind and listen when it whistled back. Abani rarely smiled in public, but in the hidden shade of their thatched hut, she danced with Naoka, tracing stories in the air with her hands. "You are not cursed," she'd say. "You are born in balance. And balance, my child, is the most feared power of all." But balance is not easily tolerated in a world of extremes. When Naoka was 12, Abani began coughing blood. The villagers said it was because she'd protected a cursed child too long. No one offered herbs. No one sang healing songs. When Abani died, Naoka buried her alone, digging with blistered fingers until the earth finally accepted the body. That very evening, the village flames began to shift unnaturally. The priest claimed the next eclipse would be longer than any before, and the sun might not return. A girl must be sacrificed, he declared, one born in shadow. The people understood at once. They had waited too long, tolerated her too long. The one born during the last eclipse must be the offering for the next. Word reached Naoka like a whisper through the grass. She did not cry. She did not scream. But something inside her twisted. Not in fear, but in defiance. She returned to her mother's grave that night, sitting in silence, her fingers trailing patterns in the dirt. The wind shifted. A whisper, gentle but clear, moved through the fig trees. "They do not understand the eclipse." The next morning, when the village elders came with red paint and ritual robes, Naoka did not run. She stood at the threshold of her home, quiet and still. "I was born in shadow," she said, "but I carry light too." They ignored her. The rituals began immediately. Her head was shaved. Her body wrapped in white cloth. She was not allowed to speak. Her wrists were bound with bark rope. Children were told not to look at her. Women whispered that she had always brought bad luck. The priest said if they didn't offer her, the sky itself would punish them. But strange things began happening. The birds stopped nesting in the trees near the temple. The goats cried all night, their voices trembling with a sound no one recognized. And each morning, dew pooled in the shape of spirals on the ground around Naoka's hut, even when no other part of the village was wet. When the elders went to pray, their fire refused to light. Some began murmuring in fear. Yet the priest pressed on, declaring these signs as proof of the necessity of sacrifice. "She disturbs the order," he said. "She must be silenced." One girl, barely older than Naoka, dared to speak after hearing that. "Maybe it is not she who disturbs the order. Maybe we have no idea what balance looks like." She was slapped into silence. In the days leading up to the eclipse, Naoka sat in the sacred tent, alone but not broken. At night she sang softly, songs her mother had taught her. Not of anger or revenge but of return. Of the cycle of seasons. Of how the moon bends to the sun, and the sun waits for the moon. The night before the eclipse, a strange calm settled on the land. The stars blinked in strange patterns. A breeze from the east carried the scent of figs and wild ginger. People woke unsettled. Children wept in their sleep. At dawn, the village gathered around the altar stone, the very place where generations of girls had been offered. Naoka was led forward. She walked with bare feet, unflinching, her hands no longer bound. They had not tied her that morning. Perhaps they thought her spirit was broken. But her steps were steady. She stood before the sun. It began its climb. Drums sounded. The priest raised his staff. And then the moon began to move. The eclipse was beginning. But something was wrong. The light dimmed, then froze. The moon hovered, not passing fully across the sun. A strange shimmer covered the sky like a veil refusing to lower. The priest panicked. He gestured wildly. "Why won't it begin?" he yelled. From the gathered crowd, a single voice rose, "Because she has not agreed." Eyes turned to Naoka. The girl lifted her hands. She sang one note, soft and low. The wind caught it, spinning the sound across the gathering. The clouds parted. The sun shivered. The moon moved again. And the eclipse, slowly, majestically, continued. The people gasped. Naoka turned, and for the first time, everyone saw her clearly, not as a cursed child, but as one who had held the sky in stillness. One born not of doom but of balance. Light and dark, sun and shadow, she was the bridge. In that moment, a new silence fell over Ankara. Not the silence of fear but the silence that comes before truth. And in that silence, the village began to remember what they had forgotten. Under the blood-red sky of Ankara, a hush had fallen over the village. The sun dipped slowly, casting long, trembling shadows across the earth as if even it feared the events to come. The village had gathered in a great circle, draped in ceremonial cloths dyed in colors of rust and shadow. At the center stood a tall wooden platform, its beams weathered from years of use. This was the place where girls were marked, where fear was branded into flesh and silence was forced into song. Today it was Naoka's turn. She stood barefoot before the elders, her thin frame wrapped in a pale tunic that fluttered despite the heavy stillness in the air. Her eyes, wide and dark as moonless pools, were dry. She did not cry. She did not shake. She simply stood, humming a tune, soft, ancient, familiar. It was her mother's song, the one she had sung while stirring herbs, while brushing Naoka's hair, while hiding them in the hollow behind the water drums when voices of the council came too close. The villagers watched her with a mixture of awe and discomfort. A girl meant for sacrifice should beg. She should wail. She should make peace with her gods and plead with her ancestors. But Naoka only hummed, eyes distant, heart steady. Her song curled through the circle like smoke, making even the crows pause in flight. The high priest, Iroba, stepped forward with the ceremonial ash bowl. His face was painted in harsh streaks of white and black, a mask of contrast meant to invoke the balance between sun and shadow. He dipped his thumb into the thick gray paste and pressed it against Naoka's forehead. The ash was cold, smelling of burnt salt and crushed bones. A smear in the shape of the eclipse, a sun devoured by shadow, was left behind. "Naoka, daughter of Eclipse," he intoned, "your birth broke the cycle. Your death shall restore it." Still she hummed. A murmur rustled through the villagers like wind in dry grass. Some old women shifted uncomfortably. Some children clutched their mothers tighter. No one moved to stop it. No one dared challenge what had always been done. The elders had always said the balance must be kept. Every generation, when the sky prepared to swallow the sun, a girl was chosen. Her life offered in exchange for the light's return. Those born too close to the sacred hour, those like Naoka, were never safe. Marked by destiny, they were seen as bridges between worlds, cracks in tradition, threats in human form. Naoka had grown knowing her time would come. Her mother Mamba had known too. That was why they lived far from the village heart, why her name was rarely spoken aloud, why Mamba had taught her songs of storm and hush and memory. "Your voice," she had whispered once, tracing Naoka's cheek with trembling fingers, "is older than their fear. Let it carry you." Now her mother was gone, buried beneath a twisted fig tree with no marker. And Naoka stood alone, her humming louder, stronger, filling the space between heartbeat and breath. The crowd parted as the elders led her toward the path of sacrifice. It was a narrow trail winding up the cliff's edge, flanked by thorn vines and old carvings in the stone, names of those who had walked before and never returned. At the top was the drop, a jagged ledge where the sea foamed like a rabid beast below. No body had ever been recovered. That too was part of the ritual. The eclipse would not begin until the girl had been taken. But as they neared the cliff, something shifted. The wind, which had been silent all day, suddenly turned sharp and chaotic. It howled between the trees, tugged at robes, slapped faces with grit and sand. Birds rose from the forest in squawking clouds. The sun, just moments from vanishing, seemed to stall behind a veil of fast-moving clouds. Then came the thunder. It was not from the sea. It was not from the sky. It came from within the earth, deep, groaning, ancient. The stones beneath the villagers' feet trembled. The path to the cliff cracked slightly, not enough to break, but enough to make the priests stop in their march. Lightning flashed, not white, but a strange violet hue, illuminating Naoka's face in sharp, unnatural lines. Her humming grew louder. "What trick is this?" Iroba shouted over the wind, holding tight to his ceremonial staff. "She sings to the storm," cried a man near the back of the crowd. "She calls the shadow to consume us." But others only stared. Some wept. Some covered their ears, not in pain but in awe. Naoka's voice was not loud, yet it cut through the chaos like a thread of silk through fire. It did not tremble. It did not plead. It simply was. Iroba motioned forward. "Continue." The guards hesitated. "Take her," he screamed. They stepped forward. And then the rain began, not heavy but sharp, slicing through the air like whispers. It soaked the ash on Naoka's face, made streaks down her cheeks like war paint. She tilted her head back, let it wash her. Her song changed, deeper now, more rhythmic. And the sky responded. The eclipse halted. It hovered, sun and moon nearly aligned, yet not quite. The heavens refused to continue. The people gasped. Never had an eclipse paused. Never had the cycle stopped. The elders huddled together in frantic murmurs. "It's her," someone whispered. "The cursed child. She holds the sun hostage." "Then kill her now," spat another. But the guards could not move. Their feet rooted to the earth. Every attempt to step forward was met with a push, not physical but invisible, like walking into air made of stone. The wind whipped around Naoka in tight spirals, her hair dancing like flame. A child broke from the crowd, a small boy named Temi. He had once watched Naoka sing to a dying bird and seen it lift its wings again. He ran to her now, pressing his tiny hands to hers. "They want to hurt you," he said, eyes wide. "They always did," she answered softly. "Why don't you run?" "Because the eclipse is listening." The elders shouted for the boy to be taken away, but no one moved. Fear had stolen their limbs. Awe had silenced their mouths. The storm grew. The earth groaned again. Naoka closed her eyes and sang a new song, one her mother never taught her but lived in her bones. It was not in any known tongue, but every heart heard it. It spoke of buried daughters, of names unspoken, of shadows that remembered every scream. The moon pulled closer to the sun, but still the union held. The sacrifice had not been made. The balance had not been paid. And yet the world did not end. The sky did not fall. Instead the storm softened. The wind stilled. The rain turned warm. Naoka's song faded into breath. The guards dropped their weapons. The crowd stepped back. Iroba fell to his knees. The cliff untouched. The ritual unfulfilled. The eclipse suspended. It was not until the sun fully set, by its own will, not by blood, that the people finally understood. Naoka had not been cursed. She had been chosen, yes, but not for death. For balance. For interruption. For reminder. She turned from the cliff and walked back through the crowd. No one stopped her. No one could. And as she passed, the ash on her face dried into gold. The hut was built of thick reeds and stone, perched just far enough from the edge of the cliff to see the ocean but close enough to feel its pull. Wind battered its walls day and night, and the cries of gulls circled above like restless souls. Inside, Naoka sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers tracing patterns into the dusty earth. The markings on her skin had turned dark and dry. Ash clung to her hair and clotted the space beneath her fingernails. Her humming, low and continuous, blended with the wind, her mother's song, taught in whispers, preserved in memory. They had locked her away after the storm disrupted the sacrifice. The storm had arrived too quickly, swirling in defiance, lashing rain into faces and tearing ceremonial cloth from the trees. The elders had seen it as a bad omen. They postponed the ritual, muttering prayers and blaming Naoka's refusal to scream. That silence unnerved them. It was easier to throw screaming girls into the sky than it was to confront a calm one who sang to the wind. She had been left in the hut with food for 2 days, millet, dried meat, and sour water. The warriors stood guard outside, speaking little and staring into the distance as if afraid to meet her eyes. Occasionally, one of them would glance toward the hut with unease, especially when her humming echoed louder than it should have. At night, the wind grew more insistent, pushing against the hut's thatched roof as though trying to lift it. Naoka noticed her presence on the second day. A soft rustling in the dark corner of the hut, then the sound of a cough, dry and deep like cracked wood. She turned and found an old woman lying on a mat of woven straw, her milky eyes half-lidded, her skin stretched like parchment over brittle bones. The woman said nothing at first. She only tilted her head in Naoka's direction, breathing shallowly. "I didn't know anyone else was here," Naoka whispered. The woman smiled, showing 3 teeth and a line of dark gums. "They think I'm already dead," she rasped. "And sometimes I agree with them." Naoka shifted closer, careful not to startle her. "What's your name?" "Tann," the old woman said. "And you're the girl they've marked." Naoka nodded. "They say the sun won't return unless I die." Tann chuckled, a sound dry and strange like rust scraping stone. "They said the same when I was your age. I was taken here just like you. But the sky didn't want me then either. You escaped." Tann turned her face toward the sliver of light spilling through the hut's single crack. I listened better than they ever did. And I learned what they never wanted to admit. The eclipse doesn't hunger for blood. It waits for balance. It comes to remind us that even the sun must rest. Even the moon must share." Naoka's humming paused. The wind outside seemed to shift, growing softer, wrapping around the hut instead of pressing against it. "They said the storms meant the spirits were angry," she said. "That the eclipse will not pass unless someone dies." "They lie to themselves because they fear uncertainty," Tann said. "For generations they've killed girls like us to soothe the ache of the unknown. But not once have they asked the sky what it truly wants." "Then why does the eclipse come every time?" Naoka asked. Tann's eyes turned toward her, clouded but piercing. "Because it always comes. It's not a trade. It's a rhythm. And you were born in its shadow. You carry the rhythm already." Naoka's heart thudded against her chest. The wind pushed through the hut's crack with a sigh that matched the beat. "My mother taught me songs," she whispered. "She said they calmed storms." Tann nodded. She knew. She must have remembered the truth even if only in her bones. "Then what should I do?" Naoka asked. Tann sat up with difficulty, her thin arms trembling. "You must listen, child. You must listen to the wind, to the ground, to your own blood. The eclipse does not want you dead. It wants you present. It wants you to stand." Naoka stared at the old woman. The fear that had been lodged inside her chest since the day of her marking began to shift, first loosening, then fading. She stood slowly, letting her bare feet press into the dirt floor, grounding herself. "Will they let me live?" she asked. Tann smiled again. "They will try not to. But the sky may have other plans." Outside, the sky had begun to darken again, though it was only midday. Clouds rolled in over the cliff, swirling like whispered thoughts. The guards looked up, unsettled. A breeze rushed through the tall grass, bending the blades in waves toward the hut. Inside, Naoka raised her hands and closed her eyes. She began to hum, not the soft, shy tune she'd sung in secret, but a stronger melody now, one that carried the power of knowing. She let it rise, shaping the sound with her breath, her chest, her spine. The wind answered. It pushed against the hut, not to knock it down but to echo her rhythm. The grass outside danced to her tune. Even the ocean waves below began to rise and fall in time with her humming. Tann placed a hand on Naoka's shoulder, her grip feather-like but certain. "The eclipse is coming. They will bring you to the cliff again. This time do not go quietly." Naoka nodded. Her voice rose higher, no longer just a hum but a song. The tune spun through the air like silk, wrapping around the old woman, the guards, the cliff, and the village beyond. The guards stood in stunned silence, their spears lowering. One of them stepped closer to the hut and peered through the opening. His lips parted, but no words came. Instead, he turned and ran, back toward the village as if the melody itself chased him. Naoka continued singing. The beat pulsed with certainty, her voice no longer small but ancestral, full. The winds no longer whistled but carried her song, echoing through the cliffs, over the houses, under the roots of trees. Tann leaned back and exhaled. "You are no sacrifice," she whispered. "You are the balance returned." And the wind, rushing in all directions, seemed to agree. The dawn rose slow, its light thick with unease. The village of Nkara stirred under a sky that felt too still, too heavy, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. This was the day of the eclipse, the sacred day when shadow would momentarily consume the sun, and balance would be restored. But something in the air whispered of change, of disruption. The birds did not take flight from the trees. The dogs refused to bark. Even the goats stood frozen, their eyes wide with a primal knowing. No laughter echoed, no drums beat. Just silence, stretched tight as the rope meant to bind Naoka's hands. Within the thatched hut by the cliff's edge, Naoka pressed her palm against the dirt floor. She could feel it, the hush under the surface, the tension coiled in the earth itself. The air smelled not of death as the elders had foretold, but of waiting. Not a waiting for sacrifice but a waiting for truth. Beside her, Tann, the old blind woman who had once fled this same fate, listened to the wind and nodded. "They are afraid," Tann whispered, her eyes cloudy but knowing. "Not of your death, but of your living." Naoka looked to the window where a single ray of sunlight had broken through the cloud-thick sky. It bent unusually toward her face, warming her skin. She felt it like a mother's touch. Gentle, protective, alive. Outside, the warriors sharpened their spears. Their brows were furrowed not with confidence but confusion. The eclipse had always come obediently, darkening the skies only after the blood of the chosen girl had soaked the sacred stone. But now the sun lingered longer than it should. A crimson tint hung across the horizon, and the shadows cast by the trees did not move, pinned in place like ghosts reluctant to vanish. As the village prepared for the ritual, Naoka and Tann acted. Tann's fingers moved with the memory of her youth, undoing the simple knot that bound the door. Naoka had not slept that night. She had listened to the soil, to the winds, to the stars murmuring above. She no longer feared what came next. Her mother's songs hummed in her throat, stronger now. They were not lullabies. They were keys, unlocked doors she hadn't known existed. The hut door creaked open. No guards stood in their way. The warriors had been called to the main square, where the elders debated the strange stillness of the sky. Naoka stepped barefoot onto the earth, her feet feeling each stone, each crack. The world beneath her pulsed, not with fear but recognition. Tann stayed close, her cane tapping like a heartbeat. Together they moved through the trees, the forest strangely silent, reverent. As they reached the village's edge, something miraculous happened. The first animal, a heron, stepped from the brush and began to follow them. Then came a dog. Then a young calf, then two more goats. Not in chaos, not in fear, but as if summoned by some silent rhythm only they could hear. Naoka did not look back. She walked straight into the village square, where people had begun to murmur, pointing upward. The sun had stopped moving. It did not rise. It did not fall. It stayed, caught at the same point in the sky where it should have begun its darkening. The eclipse refused to begin. The elders stood in a circle, dressed in black, their ash-covered faces cracking under sweat. They looked up, then at each other, then at the sacred platform where Naoka was meant to be tied. It stood empty. A murmur grew into a rustle, a breeze not from wind, but from eyes turning, necks twisting, to the girl walking through the village like she owned it. There she was. Naoka. Alive. Untouched. Unbowed. The crowd parted. Not from command but from awe. Even the wind shifted to make way for her. Children stood open-mouthed. The dogs that followed her did not bark. They sat quietly at her side like guards of another world. Naoka stopped before the sacred stone and placed a hand upon it. It was cold. Too cold. A stone that had never refused to drink blood now trembled under her palm. She felt it, its hunger yes but also its shame. It had become a monument of fear, not balance. Her voice rose, not in scream but in song. She sang the song her mother had whispered into her bones. A song of storms and stillness. Of shadow that did not kill but healed. The melody spiraled through the village, curling around eaves and fences, into hearts and memories. Elders clutched their staffs tighter, their hands trembling. Some villagers wept without knowing why. And still the eclipse did not begin. The high priest stepped forward, his eyes wild. She must be bound. The sun waits for her blood. No, came a voice. Tann. She stepped beside Naoka, her blind eyes facing the priest. The sun waits for her breath. For her voice. For her to live. The priest spat on the ground. Sacrilege. But another elder, older than the priest and quieter, stepped forward too. Then why has the sky not darkened? He asked. Why does the sun not obey us? The priest faltered. The girls we've killed, the elder continued, did they scream? They cried, the priest answered. But she. The elder pointed at Naoka. She sings. Naoka turned to the sky and sang again, louder now, the melody a memory of all the voices silenced before her. She sang for those who could not climb down from the cliff. For those whose names had been erased from stones. For the mothers who bled in silence and the daughters who learned too early how to disappear. And then it happened. The sky trembled. Not a thunderclap. Not a storm. The clouds folded inward, the light twisting in spirals as if responding to her song. The sun dimmed, not all at once but slowly as if reconsidering its descent. The eclipse began, but not in darkness. In gold. In heatless fire. In a glow that filled the village like breath. People fell to their knees. Not out of fear but reverence. They watched Naoka step onto the platform not to be bound but to sing. Her arms wide, her body bathed in strange light. Her song filled the air, and with it came something that hadn't touched Ankara in generations. Balance. Birds finally flew. Goats bleated. Babies cried. The wind danced through the village, sweeping through doors and windows, lifting curtains like blessings. When the moon finally crossed before the sun, it cast no shadow. Only shimmer. As if saying, we are still here but we are changed. The eclipse did not require blood. It required her. Naoka descended from the platform. No rope ever touched her. The sacred stone had warmed under her hand. The high priest knelt, no longer sure what he believed. The villagers approached her, not with chains but with offerings. Petals. Threads of woven cloth. Pieces of memory. You stopped the sky, a girl whispered. No, Naoka said softly. I reminded it to move. Behind her Tann smiled. And when Naoka walked once more toward the edge of the village, the sun resumed its path, casting light not as a punishment but as a promise. She had survived the day the sky waited. She had not just defied death. She had rewritten it. Naoka stepped into the circle carved from stones and earth, the place where countless girls before her had been laid down, bound by fear and silence. The air was thick with waiting, heavy as the shadows that clung to the edges of the village. Around her, the villagers gathered, eyes wide and voices hushed, as if the very breath they held could shatter this fragile moment. Her feet touched the ground lightly, but her heart pounded like the drums that once had beaten here, drums now stilled by doubt. She knew the stories. How the eclipse demanded a sacrifice, how the sky would not darken unless blood stained the altar. But Naoka was no ordinary girl. She carried in her chest a song older than the stones beneath her feet, a melody spun from the secrets her mother whispered into the night air. As she lifted her head, she saw the sky tense, the sun's light bending, flickering as if unsure of its own path. The villagers shivered, some clutching talismans, others gripping their children tightly. The elders wore masks of iron resolve, but beneath their calm a storm brewed. Naoka drew a slow breath and began to sing. Her voice was soft at first, like a breeze teasing the leaves, but it grew steadily, stronger, deeper, carrying the weight of every unheard story, every silenced voice. It wrapped around the circle, weaving through the faces turned toward her, stirring something ancient and powerful in the soil beneath. The sky responded. Dark clouds swirled, not covering the sun entirely but pulsing with the rhythm of her song. Light and shadow danced in reluctant balance, a hesitant eclipse caught between two worlds. The villagers gasped. The elders frowned. Whispers filled the air, some with hope, others with fear. Kneeling to the earth, many crossed themselves or lowered their heads, unsure whether to pray or to flee. The high priest stepped forward, his voice sharp and demanding. Silence. The ritual demands silence. Only through stillness can the eclipse complete. Stop this blasphemy, girl. But Naoka's voice would not be silenced. It rose and fell like the tides, a river carving through stone, unstoppable and sure. The melody was no longer hers alone. It carried the echoes of the girls who had been lost before, their sorrow transformed into strength. Around the circle, flowers began to bloom in defiance, red and white petals unfurling where the earth had once been barren. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the blooms grew, each one seeming to pulse with the heartbeat of the song. The elders' eyes narrowed. This is witchcraft, one shouted. This is not the way. Yet the eclipse lingered in its suspended dance, neither fully dark nor fully light. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Naoka's voice softened then, turning from defiance to invitation. She sang of balance, of the sun and moon as partners, not enemies. She sang of pain transformed, of power born not from death but from endurance. The wind stirred, carrying her song beyond the circle, through the village, over the hills, reaching ears long deafened by fear. It swept through the hearts of those who listened, igniting sparks of change. Slowly, one by one, villagers rose from their knees. Some reached out to touch the blooming flowers, feeling warmth where they expected cold. Others looked to the elders, searching for answers and faces lined with uncertainty. Naoka's eyes met those of the high priest, steady and unflinching. "The sky refuses to move because it waits for a new song," she said. "One that honors life, not death." A hush fell again. The eclipse began to shift, slowly, deliberately, its shadow creeping across the sun's face like a whispered promise. The villagers held their breath, watching the dance between light and dark unfold in a new way. When the moon finally passed, leaving the sun shining brighter than before, the crowd erupted, not in fear but in awe. Naoka stood alone in the circle, unbound, unbroken. The song lingered in the air, a testament to the power of a voice that refused to be silenced. And in that moment the village of Nkara knew that the eclipse had changed forever, not because of blood but because of a song. The moment Naoka's song filled the air, the elders' faces twisted with growing unease. Their eyes darted between the reluctant eclipse and the girl who dared to challenge tradition with nothing but her voice. The ritual, so carefully etched into the fabric of their lives, now seemed to slip from their grasp, a delicate balance disrupted by a single note. Whispers grew to murmurs, murmurs to sharp breaths of panic. The high priest's jaw clenched. He motioned to the others, the council of elders standing in a tight circle behind him. Their hands gripped ceremonial knives, their weapons gleaming cruelly under the fractured light of the sun and moon. The knives were ancient, passed down from generation to generation, said to carry the power of the ancestors. Today they were meant to enforce the old order, to cut down the defiance in Naoka's song. But as they moved toward her, blades raised and eyes hard with resolve, something in the air shifted. The sky flickered, light and shadow warred across its vast expanse as if it too watched, as if it questioned the elders' power. The villagers froze, caught between fear and disbelief, unable to tear their gaze from the unfolding confrontation. One elder stepped forward, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Enough of this madness. You stall the balance, girl. The sun will not return unless the ritual is completed. We demand you cease this song and accept your fate." Naoka's eyes met his, not with fear, but with the quiet strength of one who has seen beyond the veils of old lies. Her voice rose, clear and unwavering. "You feared the eclipse," she said softly, "but I was born of it. The shadow that falls is not death, it is balance. You do not understand what you try to control." The elder growled and lunged forward, blade slicing the air. But as his knife neared Naoka, it shattered into fragments, falling harmlessly to the ground. Gasps echoed through the circle. The other elders hesitated, raising their knives in unison, only to see them shatter one by one when aimed at her. The villagers murmured, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion. The old power seemed to reject the violence, the fear, the control the elders wielded so desperately. The sky continued its dance, flickering with light and shadow as if it responded to Naoka's song, acknowledging her truth. Naoka took a step forward, her voice steady and clear. "This is not a curse but a gift. The eclipse does not demand blood, it demands respect, understanding. The old ways have blinded you to the true balance between light and shadow." The elders faltered, their certainty cracking as much as their blades. Doubt crept into the hearts of the villagers, who began to question what they had accepted for generations. The fear that once held them silent loosened its grip, replaced by a flicker of hope and curiosity. A young woman from the crowd stepped closer, her voice trembling but clear. "If the eclipse is not for sacrifice, then why has this been our way for so long?" Naoka smiled gently, her song weaving into her words. "Because fear kept us bound. Because the stories we tell shape the world we live in. But the sky does not demand death, it calls for balance. It calls for courage to sing new songs." The elders exchanged uneasy glances, sensing their power slipping like sand through their fingers. Some clung to old rituals, others looked away, unable to face the change dawning before them. As Naoka's song rose again, stronger and more alive, the eclipse began to move once more. The shadow slowly gave way, the sun's light returning in a cascade of warmth that washed over the village like a blessing. The people cheered, their voices lifted in celebration not just of the sun's return but of a new beginning, one where fear no longer ruled and balance was found not through pain, but through understanding. And Naoka, the girl born of the eclipse, stood at the heart of it all, her voice the unbroken thread weaving the village into a future shaped by truth and light. Time seemed to fold in on itself as if the very fabric of the world held its breath. The sky hung suspended between light and shadow, caught in a timeless moment that defied the laws that once ruled the village of Ankara. The sun, half hidden behind the moon, cast a strange glow over the land, a glow that felt neither warm nor cold, but heavy with expectation. The villagers stood frozen in place, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the birds, which moments before had been restless and silent, held their breath in the branches. The air was thick with a power unseen but palpably present, a force that hummed beneath the skin and thrummed through the bones. From the crowd, a figure emerged, an old woman wrapped in tattered cloth, her eyes blind but her gaze piercing as if she could see the very soul of the eclipse. It was Tann, the woman who had once been marked for sacrifice but had escaped, carrying with her the hidden truths of the village. She moved slowly but with purpose, her hands raised to the sky as if pulling the unseen threads of history and fate into the present moment. Her voice, cracked and ancient, rose like a chant carried on the wind. "Listen," she called, "to the stories buried beneath our feet, beneath the stones and the dust of forgotten years. The sacrifices were never about blood. No, they were about fear. Fear of the dark, fear of the unknown. The eclipse is not a curse but a promise. A promise of balance between what is seen and what is hidden." The wind responded, stirring leaves and dust in a swirling dance around her. Clouds above pulsed and shifted as if breathing, their edges glowing with an otherworldly light. The village watched in silent awe as the sky itself seemed to acknowledge her words. Naoka, standing nearby, felt a warmth spread through her body. It began as a faint glow beneath her skin, pulsing softly with the rhythm of her heartbeat. It grew brighter, spreading from her chest outward like the dawn breaking across the horizon. The glow was gentle but fierce, a light born from the very eclipse that marked her birth. Children gathered close, their eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. One small child, no older than 5, reached out and touched Naoka's hand. "She is the eclipse," the child whispered, voice trembling but sure. The words spread like wildfire, carried on the breath of the wind through the crowd. Murmurs grew to voices, voices to cries of amazement and hope. The villagers, who had lived in fear for generations, now saw the truth reflected in Naoka's glowing form. She was not a sacrifice but the living embodiment of balance itself. Tann continued her chant, calling on the ancestors to witness this moment. "They who walked before us, who suffered and hoped, whose spirits watch over these lands, bear witness. The time of fear is over. The eclipse waits, but it waits for harmony, not death." The wind swirled faster, carrying leaves and petals that shimmered with a faint light. The ground beneath Naoka seemed to pulse with energy, as if the earth itself recognized the shift taking place. Her glow brightened until she seemed surrounded by a halo of pure light, casting away shadows and illuminating faces filled with wonder. The elders, once so sure of their power, now stood silent and uncertain. Their eyes, once cold and commanding, softened as they watched the girl who had defied their rituals and reshaped their beliefs. Some bowed their heads in respect, others exchanged uneasy glances, knowing their time as rulers of fear was ending. Naoka looked out over the village, her voice clear and steady. "The eclipse is not darkness to fear, nor light to worship blindly. It is the balance between the space where life breathes and grows. We are not bound by old fears but freed by understanding." The crowd responded with a chorus of agreement, their voices rising together in a new song, one of hope, courage, and the promise of a future rewritten. The sky, no longer stuck but flowing gently, resumed its dance, the sun slowly emerging from behind the moon to bathe the land in warm light. The child's words echoed again, carried on the breeze, "She is the eclipse." And in that moment, the village of Ankara was reborn, not as a place of sacrifice and fear, but as a home where light and shadow coexisted in harmony, where a girl's song could move the heavens and change the world. The morning air hung heavy with tension as the villagers gathered once again near the cliff where so many rituals had taken place over the centuries. The once familiar circle of ancient stones, weathered by time and countless ceremonies, seemed to pulse with a restless energy. What had once been a perfect ring was now fractured, small cracks spiderwebbing across the surface of the stones, glimmering faintly in the dim light. The cracks weren't caused by ordinary wear. They grew wider with each passing moment, as if the stones themselves were alive, shifting and reacting to the power swirling through the land. Whispers spread among the crowd, hushed and fearful, as a wind began to stir, soft at first, then rising in a chorus of voices carried on the breeze. From the depths of the earth, a low hum began to resonate. It vibrated through the ground and into the bones of every person present, stirring something ancient and primal within their hearts. Then, slowly, faint forms began to rise from the soil, shimmering silhouettes at first, like mist caught in the morning light, then growing clearer with each breath. The ancestral spirits were coming. They surrounded Naoka, rising like a protective veil around her fragile, glowing form. Their faces were kind yet strong, eyes full of stories passed down through generations. These were the women and men who had walked the same earth, faced the same fears and carried the same hopes. The villagers, overwhelmed by the sight, fell silent. All except one voice that broke through the hush, a voice that grew louder, stronger, until it became a steady chant, a heartbeat uniting the people. Naoka, Naoka, Naoka. The chanting swelled, rippling through the crowd like waves upon a shore. The ancient circle no longer seemed broken but alive, the cracks transforming into pathways of light and shadow weaving between the stones. The cliff itself began to reshape, twisting and spiraling as if bending to some unseen force. Naoka's feet carried her forward without hesitation. Each step was measured, filled with purpose as she moved toward the heart of the circle. The villagers parted respectfully, their eyes wide with reverence and awe. At the center, Naoka paused. The glow around her brightened, illuminating the newly formed spiral of light and dark that stretched upward from the stones toward the sky. The air crackled with energy as the balance between shadow and sun hovered on the edge of transformation. Then, with a deep breath, Naoka closed her eyes and stretched out her hands. The spirits around her seemed to lean in closer, their silent support a blanket of strength. The villagers' voices rose to a crescendo, carrying Naoka's name on the wind like a prayer. The eclipse, held captive for so long by fear and misunderstanding, finally began its dance. The sun slipped behind the moon with graceful inevitability, casting the world into a perfect balance of light and darkness. The sky shimmered with colors unseen before, deep purples, glowing golds and soft blues that mingled like paint on a canvas. As the eclipse unfolded, the spiral of stones glowed with an inner fire, the broken circle healed by the harmony Naoka had restored. The spirits sang in a language older than words, their voices weaving through the wind and earth alike. The villagers, once fearful and divided, now stood united in awe and hope. They had witnessed not the end but a new beginning, a sacred moment where the balance between sun and shadow was no longer maintained by sacrifice, but by understanding and courage. Naoka, at the center of it all, felt the pulse of the world beating in time with her own. The eclipse was no longer a shadow to fear but a symbol of strength, a reminder that even broken things could become whole again, that light and dark were forever intertwined in the dance of life. And as the sky slowly brightened, the villagers carried Naoka's name in their hearts, knowing that the circle, though once broken, had become a spiral of endless possibility. The eclipse slowly withdrew its shadow, retreating with a quiet dignity as the sun re-emerged on the horizon. Unlike every other time in memory, there was no scream, no cry, no sacrifice offered to satisfy the dark. The village of Nkara stood breathless, watching as light returned, not harsh and blinding but gentle and clear, like the first touch of dawn after a long restless night. Naoka, the girl once marked for death, stood among them. Her body still glowed faintly with the lingering magic of the eclipse, her eyes reflecting the new light that bathed the land. No longer was she a cursed child, she was now, the one who balanced. A title whispered with reverence by those who had feared her, who had doubted, and who now saw the truth in her calm strength. The elders, once fierce and unyielding in their demand for sacrifice, had fallen silent. Their ancient chants had given way to quiet contemplation, their faces softened by a dawning realization that the balance the village sought was not kept by bloodshed, but by understanding and harmony. Naoka walked slowly through the village, the warm light tracing the path she made. Children followed her at a respectful distance, eyes wide with curiosity and hope. She sang the songs her mother had taught her, the secret melodies that calmed storms and called the wind to dance. Her voice wove through the air like a gentle breeze, carrying with it the promise of change. She spoke softly to the villagers, explaining the truths Tann had shared with her, the real nature of the eclipse, the power of balance, and the strength found not in fear but in connection. Her words were met with nods and quiet tears, as the people began to understand the weight of their old ways, and the lightness of the new path before them. The village, once bound by shadows of sacrifice and silence, now opened its heart to the dawn of a new era. The eclipse would still mark the passage of time, still hold its sacred place in the rhythm of life. But no longer would it demand a price in blood. Instead, it would be honored with moments of silence, songs of both night and day, and celebrations of life's delicate balance. Naoka took up the role of teacher, guiding the children in the ancient songs that embraced both darkness and light. She taught them to listen, to the wind, the earth, the quiet spaces between heartbeats. Her lessons were not just about music, but about respect and courage, about facing fear and finding strength in truth. Under her gentle care, the village blossomed. The fears that had once chained them loosened, replaced by a newfound harmony. The forests grew greener, the rivers sang clearer, and the sky itself seemed to smile down upon Kara. At the edge of the village, near the cliff where the ritual stones had cracked and healed, a new tradition was born. Each eclipse, the villagers gathered not to mourn or fear, but to celebrate. They sang the songs of the night and day, their voices rising in a chorus that echoed through the hills and valleys. Silence held its place, but it was no longer a silence of sorrow, it was a silence of reverence, a space to honor the balance that Naoka had restored. And Naoka, standing among her people, felt the pulse of the world beat steady and strong beneath her feet. She was no longer just a girl marked for sacrifice, she was a living symbol of change, a beacon of hope. The sun's light had returned, softer and clearer than before, and with it came the promise that even the darkest shadows could be met with courage, compassion, and song. The village of Nkara had found its balance at last, and the story of Naoka, the girl who the eclipse refused to claim, would be told for generations to come. Naoka grew older, her presence a quiet yet unyielding force in the village of Nkara. Years passed like ripples on a vast, still lake, but she remained, neither fading with time nor dimming in spirit. Her hair turned silver like moonlight spilling over the hills, and her eyes held the depth of skies caught between dusk and dawn. To the villagers, Naoka was no longer simply a woman, she was a living legend, a guardian of balance whose story breathed life into the very air they breathed. Every eclipse, as the sun and moon met in their celestial dance, the sky in Kara dimmed gently, as if in respect, as if it itself were waiting. Villagers gathered not with fear but with reverence, eyes turned toward the heavens, hearts still, knowing that the balance Naoka had restored was still alive in the rhythms of the world. The shadows that once terrified had softened into a quiet promise, a reminder that darkness was not the absence of light but a necessary part of it. Naoka never missed a single eclipse. She stood at the cliff's edge where the ritual stones still stood, now worn smooth by time and story. The wind always seemed to carry her song then, a melody woven from the secret songs her mother had passed down and the wisdom she had gathered through the years. Her voice was a thread tying the village to the sky, reminding them of the harmony that must be kept between night and day, fear and courage, loss and hope. But time, as it must, eventually called her away. When Naoka passed, it was not with the silence of sorrow but with the quiet dignity of the seasons turning. The village mourned, yes, but also celebrated, for her life had been a light that no darkness could extinguish. They buried her near the cliff where the eclipse had last waited on her voice, and there in the earth her story took root once more. Her grave became a sacred circle, ringed with sunflowers that stretched tall and bright toward the sky, their golden faces forever turned to the sun's light. Among them, glistening black stones of obsidian were placed, dark as the night, sharp as truth. The sunflowers and obsidian spoke of Naoka's balance, the warm light that followed the shadow and the shadow that gave depth to the light. From that day forward, the eclipse never began in Kara until someone, young or old, rose to sing Naoka's song. It was a tradition born from love and respect, a living memory carried in every voice that dared to sing the song of balance. When the first note floated into the still air, the sky responded, a subtle shift, a pause as if listening. Children who were born during an eclipse carried a special place in the hearts of the villagers. They were believed to walk in Naoka's shadow, marked by the gift of balance and strength. The elders would say softly, with a mixture of pride and hope, "She walks in Naoka's shadow and light will follow her." These children grew up knowing they carried a legacy, not one of sacrifice but of courage and harmony. Naoka's story became the foundation of the village's new way. She was neither forgotten nor distant. She was felt in every gentle breeze, in the warmth of the sun after a long night, in the hush of the eclipse's embrace. Her song echoed in the laughter of children, the whispers of the elders, and the quiet moments when the village held its breath beneath the dimming sky. The people of Nkara learned that balance was not something forced or feared, but something lived and shared. They understood that light and shadow were partners, weaving together the fabric of life. And in their hearts, Naoka's spirit lived on, watching, listening, waiting for the moment when the sky would call for her song once more.